just wanted to finish with some practical application of creatively playing on the drum kit. There are three main things which you can focus on. That would be texture, dynamics and technique. So I'm just going to go over those quickly now. These are things which I think you should focus on primarily in your practice time, so that you can then forget about it all and just focus on worshipping. When you're in a worship context, you don't want to be thinking too deeply about this stuff. You want to be thinking about speaking and worshipping, and not struggling to think, oh, do I need to play quietly, or do I need to play loudly, or is my seat at the right height, and am I using the correct technique for this beat? You want to just be playing. You want to leave all that stuff behind. So this is really good to work on in your practice time, and it kind of ties in a little bit with what I said about honing your craft. So starting off then with texture, it simply just means the different sounds that you get out of the drums. Obviously cymbals are going to sound very different to drums. Drums are plastic, cymbals are metal, so they're going to have different pitches and tonality, different feel when you hit them. You have to know which ones to use and where. There's no rule, but you can kind of start in this place and then you can expand it from there, and hopefully you can get creative with it in the end. But the idea is choosing a sound source that is going to complement the part of the song that you're trying to play. So for example, you could choose to play the hi-hat in a verse. Now that is normally a good choice because the hi-hat has got a very short sustain. It's very tight, high pitch, so it is really good for a groove. So for a verse of a song, you could have something along these lines. So you can see there that the short sustained notes of the hi-hat are tight, work really well in a groove context. Now that's really good for a verse, say, but when you get to the chorus, you want to lift the song a little bit. You want to take it to the next level, but without changing it too much. So a good option could be to just simply move your right hand or your dominant hand from the hi-hat to the right. And what that does, it just changes the sound a little bit. It's no longer short and sharp, but it's kind of low, lower and longer. Different texture altogether. So I could play the same thing, but it would sound different. So it'd sound like this. So it's essentially a really similar pattern based on the same thing, but I've just moved my right hand to change the texture. That could be all that's needed, moving from a verse into a chorus. And then maybe for the bridge you want to kick it up another gear, but you don't want to keep using your cymbals because it will sound a little bit samey. Maybe you want to change the texture once more. So you might want to then play on the floor toms or the toms instead. So that could sound something like this. So really similar beat again, it's still got the same theme as the rest of it, but the texture is different. So these surfaces are different. I'm hitting plastic rather than metal. It's much sort of lower in tone, and that can be what you need for a bridge to drive it forward. So being aware of that is helpful. So that's worth practicing in your practice time, is switching from different sound sources, and then over time you'll gain experience about how to interpret which one is best for what context. So the second thing I want to talk about quickly is dynamics. There are two types really. There's an overall level of dynamics, and then there's internal dynamics. So the overall level is maybe just how you're playing in general and how you're sitting in the mix. So for example, in a verse right at the start of a song, you could be really quiet, you could just be keeping 2 and 4. Just playing quietly on the ride. That's overall, your dynamic levels are really low. The internal dynamics are referring to just one part, but changing the dynamics within that one part. So say for example, I'm playing a groove between kick, snare and hats. I could be accenting on the hi-hat on the upbeats, so something like this. So they're internal dynamics. I'm playing quietly and then I'm adding an accent. So it's internal within that voice of the drums. You could do the same on the snare, I could add some ghost notes. Again, big backbeats and then tiny ghost notes. So internal dynamics. The final thing that I wanted to talk about is the technique that you use. Basically, that just enables you to play what you hear in your head. So technique's almost the most important thing, and you should always be practicing that so that when you come to worship, you are able to express how you want to express because your technique allows you to. So if you want to play something a little bit more faster, or it requires using your fingers, for example, then you've practiced that and you're able to execute it without having to worry about it. So for example, that hi-hat pattern that I played, it requires a little bit of finger movement. Whereas if I was playing it with my wrist, I would be moving a lot more like this and using up way more energy, locking up in my arm. So learning that technique previously is going to help me to play that with more ease. Rather than that. So it's 2 different ways, but it's all related to your technique. By putting all of those elements together, when you step out into a worship context, you don't have to think about those. You've worked on them, you've practiced them, and then it's just a question of worshipping and playing and expressing creatively in a free way while you're not being held back by those things that you've been working on in the practice room. So may you all feel released to bring your offerings in worship and to continue to grow your creative gifting God has blessed you.